The Vikings stormed onto the world stage as raiders from the sea, but they went on to build a vast network of trade, and they were the first to discover America. The Vikings came from the far north of Europe, or what one Roman historian called the world's end. The Romans called this distant region Scandinavia. To outsiders, it was a mysterious place where nature ruled. It was not only distant, but almost empty, a place where ice met fire. There, the untamed forces of nature predominated. And no matter where you went, the sea was never far away. The Scandinavian coasts, comprising stretches of today's Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, were the homeland of the Vikings. When the Northmen set out in their longships, they terrorized much of Europe. One of their earliest raids came in the year 793, when the dragon ships descended upon England. Their objective, a monastery on the island of Lindisfarne. On the island, the monks lived a life of work and prayer. These pious men were rich and peaceful. They defended their treasures with words, not weapons. To the Vikings, a god who had died on the cross must be weak. He must be a god who was unable to fight or protect his people. So the treasures of the monastery were there for the taking. The monastery lay close to the coast. Once the ships had reached the shore, the raiders would fall on their victims immediately, without warning. So began an age of fear. The pagan strangers were huge men who knew neither fear nor mercy. The Vikings became notorious for their brutality. Worst of all were the berserkers, wild men who worked themselves into a frenzy of slaughter. The men of the cloth hadn't a chance against the onslaught from the sea. All they could do was pray. Most of the monks were killed on the spot. Any who survived were enslaved. The booty made the raiders powerful and famous in their homeland. They carried off as much as they could load aboard their ships. Behind them, they left death and destruction. The raid on Lindisfarne was only the beginning. From then on, the dragon ships attacked the English coast again and again. In the early Middle Ages, half of Europe lived in fear of the Vikings. The Icelandic sagas and the Edda poems told of the deeds of courageous men, of drinking parties and pirates' raids, of wandering the seas and wars. But they also told of the Vikings' gods, and there were a lot of them. The gods were not, however, the only figures that peopled the Viking imagination. The world of the Vikings was a world of secrets. It was an inexhaustible source of myths and magic. They believed that every crack in the ground, every geyser, was the home of a spirit. A giant could live in a volcano, or a dwarf tend a smithy. They believed that giants were involved even in the creation of the world. Husbands and fathers were often killed on raids over the sea. The Vikings believed that the souls of those who did not succeed in entering the other world haunted the earth to terrorize the living. Only courageous warriors found a place in the other world. They reached Valhalla. Valhalla was Odin's hall. Odin and his wife lived there and enjoyed watching contests between the fallen Vikings. In Valhalla, the warrior elite would live until the end of the world. In the daytime, they tested their strength in single combats. In the evening, they celebrated at Odin's table with mead and meat. As for those not lucky enough to die in battle, hell awaited them. It is an Old Norse word related to the English word hell, a dark place of lifeless souls. The chief god, Odin, lived in Valhalla. A rainbow bridge connected his realm with the world of men. His son, Thor, made thunder and lightning with his hammer and guarded mankind. Whatever the problem, people turned to Thor for help. The Vikings gradually assimilated Christian concepts into their world of magic and Nordic gods. Over time, missionary monks converted more and more Vikings to Christianity. The new faith spread slowly, first in Denmark, then in Norway, Iceland, and Sweden. The conversion was by and large peaceful. Women were particularly receptive to the new religion, since it held the promise of life after death for them as well. The churchmen from Germany and England established themselves, and as the centuries went by, pagan Scandinavia converted entirely to Christianity. In a very short time, the wild Scandinavians became global players. As merchants, they opened up important trade routes that led not only to southern Europe, but also deep into Eastern Europe, and even to the Orient.